Guess who's back?
Shady's back.
I've honestly missed you guys so much. I've been the most loneliest person ever.
Get a friend, loser.
Hey there guys, my name's Megan if you're new here, and if not, welcome back for another episode of Killer Weekend, where each week we'll discuss a true crime case and you guys can feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments box below. Oh, you have no idea how good it feels to say that. If you like all things true crime, supernatural, UFO, conspiracy theory, and all that good stuff in between, then please hit that subscribe button. I'll be here for you each week with our true crime killer weekends, and on and off every couple of Wednesdays with our Weirdo Wednesdays, where we'll discuss something spooky I've heard. I will leave a small disclaimer at the beginning of this episode. It does involve details of violent crime and also domestic abuse. If that's a trigger point for you, then please feel free to turn away now. And remember, if you've nothing nice to say...
Yo, shut your mouth, you dirty little hamster.
But before we get started, let me introduce you to this week's amazing sponsor. It's HelloFresh. Hello gremlins, guess what? Spooky season is right around the corner. It's so close I can practically smell the pumpkin spice syrup and overpriced polyester. Yes, it's time to say farewell to the summer sun and fall in love with HelloFresh.
People ask me where I get this. I don't know. It's maybe a gift from God.
Whether you're a parent on the go or a busy boss lady, HelloFresh has an option that is perfect for you. Between shopping for new school uniforms and that busy daily commute, you might be thinking to yourself, I don't have time to be preparing home-cooked meals. Well, with HelloFresh's quick and easy dinner options, all you need is 15 minutes in the kitchen and you're all set. Everyday life can be stressful enough without having to wait in those long lines at the supermarket, so why not try something different? Once you place your order online with HelloFresh, choosing from a selection of 40 tasty chef-crafted recipes, they do all of the hard work for you, conveniently delivering your food straight to your front door. And inside each meal kit parcel, you'll find your carefully pre-portioned ingredients, no muss, no fuss. Fall is the perfect time for hearty meals and getting cozy. So last night, the fiancé and I decided to cook up the chicken and creamy peppercorn sauce with mash and roasted carrots. This delicious HelloFresh recipe would be great for a Sunday night family dinner. The veg prep was super quick and only took me a few minutes. Yep, I know I chop veggies like a toddler. Moving on. Now, this is an ideal pick for all my people out there trying to get fit and healthy because everything is made from scratch, even the mouth-watering peppercorn sauce. And I know you're probably thinking, Megan, that looks way too yummy to be healthy, but it is only 529 calories per portion and it is so filling. Ladies, gentlemen, it's that time we have all been waiting for. It's the infamous taste test. I honestly scoffed this. It was like Gone in 60 Seconds, the sequel. It's definitely one of my favourites and an 11 out of 10. We switched to HelloFresh just over 2 years ago and have never looked back. So what are you waiting for? Start your HelloFresh journey today. Go to hellofresh.com and use code 50MEGANTC at checkout for 50% off plus free shipping. Yes, it's daylight robbery, so run, don't walk. Go to hellofresh.com and use code 50MEGANTC at checkout for 50% off plus free shipping. Happy cooking! Hiya gremlins, how are you today? Shite? Me too. But as Troy and Gabriella once said, we're all in this together.
Are you high today?
But anywho, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, you came here to talk about true crime. And as always, I came prepared. However, this case, dare I say, has to be one of the most shocking true crime stories I have ever heard ever. And coming from me, you know that says a lot. Over the past couple of years, we've discussed child killers, sexual sadists, abductions, even a mannequin who came alive at night. But trust me when I say, you ain't never heard anything like this. Well, unless you watched the news in 2015, then you might have heard of something like this. Yes, this is the Hulk roller coaster of true crime cases. So strap yourselves in, get some snacks, or if you're on a health kick like me, some lettuce, and let us dive in. Okay, I'll stop. Tonight, everyone, we will be discussing the mysterious death of Noela Rukundo, the murder victim who crashed her own funeral. Sunday, the 22nd of February 2015 was a blinder of a day for those living in Melbourne, Australia. In terms of weather, it was around 37 degrees Celsius that afternoon and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. In the small suburb of Kings Park, the local playgrounds were packed with laughing children enjoying the sunshine. Couples kissed on benches and lay on picnic blankets, soaking up every minute before having to return to work the next day. Only a few streets away, however, things were less cheery, as that same morning the Kalala family had said a final farewell to their beloved matriarch. Belenga Kalala, a doting stepfather, father and once husband, embraced his children as they wept over the loss of their beautiful mum. Noela Rukundo had been attending a family funeral in the city of Bujumbura in Burundi when she was abducted by a gang of local thugs, never to be seen again. Despite pushing East African authorities to investigate the sinister disappearance, no further action was taken, and it was strongly suspected that, like so many other women who went missing in the area, Noela's remains would never be found. The young family had been struck by grief many times in the past, and some within the local African community even wondered if they were perhaps cursed. The service itself was a traditional Christian celebration with some tales from the Bible and a few personal anecdotes courtesy of Noela's close friends and loved ones. It was a senseless kidnapping, and no one could quite understand why the nurturing and selfless mother of 8 never made it home. All she ever wanted was to be a good wife and mum, something she'd had great success at for the last decade of her tragically short life. As it reached 7:30 p.m, the mourners began to head out, leaving the Kalala's home and stepping into the balmy February evening. Belenga, ever the gentleman, escorted the last few guests to the front door. It wasn't easy pushing his own feelings of heartbreak to one side, but he knew that his wife wouldn't want him breaking down and causing a scene in front of their neighbours. However, as he waved off the last remaining guests, Belenga began to see a familiar figure emerging from the distance. Across the street, a young black woman exited a dark-coloured car and started walking towards the home he'd once shared with his late wife. At first, he truly thought he was hallucinating. Was this? But it couldn't be. Had Belenga Kalala finally lost his mind with grief? Blinking furiously, believing that his eyes must be playing tricks on him, he walked towards the angelic being. It was his wife, Noela Rukundo, and she was coming straight for him. And I'm sure we're all wondering what the F is going on right now. But to answer that question, we really need to travel back to Central Africa in the early 2000s, where it all began. In 2003, the couple were complete strangers to one another, separated by just over 2,000 kilometres of distance. However, devastating events would soon bring them together. At the time, Belenga was living in a small village within the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He'd married a local girl at the age of 24, and the two had a child, a 1-year-old son. The young parents were so happy, but they couldn't ignore the mounting unrest that was taking place around them. Throughout the late 90s and early 2000s, several countries in Africa were at war, mainly due to the mass genocide that occurred just a few years prior. Many citizens living amongst the bloodshed went to bed at night not knowing whether they would wake up in the morning. Belenga and his first wife did their best to stay out of the conflict, but just as they had feared, death and destruction would come knocking at their door. At the age of 27, the young husband and father witnessed a sight that no one should ever have to, when the area that they were living in was ambushed by rebels carrying machetes. Strange men stormed into their home and wrestled Belenga to the ground. He was then held in place and forced to watch on as his wife was brutalized and finally hacked to pieces in front of his eyes. As much as he fought, he was unable to break out of their grasp, and then they turned their blades on his baby boy. Traumatized and practically catatonic, Belenga was held hostage, his captors constantly beating him and extorting him for valuable resources and supplies. They finally agreed to let him go if he would tell them where his 2 cows were kept, and bizarrely, the rebels were true to their word. After a year in a Botswanan refugee camp, the widower was granted entry into Australia, where he hoped to slowly put his mangled life back together again. It was while staying in the land down under that he met mother of 5, Noela Rukundo. Unlike Belenga, she didn't speak a word of English, and when she arrived in Melbourne, a social worker introduced the two and had Belenga translate for her. At first, it was just a friendship. The single mum was cautious about getting into another serious relationship, as she too had suffered her fair share of loss. The father of her children had also died back in Africa, so for now the two would keep things platonic. But of course, the undeniable chemistry was always there, simmering in the background of every conversation. Others in the community agreed Belenga was a catch. He was a hard worker who first got a job within a seafood processing factory before moving on to a warehouse working as a forklift driver. He was really keen on Noela and made it known that he was not only willing to provide for her, but also for her 5 precious children from her previous marriage. As much as she tried not to, she fell hard and fast for the man with the dark past, and the two were married in a traditional church ceremony on March 31st, 2012. In the beginning, things were great. In the suburb of Kings Park, Noela and Belenga had found a way to start again. Along with others from their home country, they attended church every Sunday, becoming close friends with the pastor, Desano Haruno Nantogma. To those on the outside, they were living the dream. But shortly after walking down the aisle, Noela's nightmare really began. Belenga had always been a fiery character. In fact, it was one of the things that his wife loved most about him when they'd first met. But things had changed. He became controlling and jealous, and it seemed as though every little thing that Noela did caused him irritation. Just after the birth of their first child, their fights turned physical. Pretty soon, Belenga was trying to dictate all aspects of his new bride's life. He decided what she wore, who she saw, and where she went, and God help her if she dared to disobey him. Despite the violent outbursts, Noela felt obligated to stay with her abuser. Not only would she be shunned from the community if she filed for divorce, but she also felt sorry for him for all that he had endured in his past. Belenga was clearly suffering from some serious serious PTSD after witnessing the brutal murder of both his wife and young son. But due to toxic male stereotypes and optics, he refused to seek professional help. Instead, he took all of that pent-up rage and took it out on Noela. After 2.5 years and 3 kids, Noela, beaten down emotionally and physically, had resigned to the fact that this was her life now and that there would be no escape. Like a puppet master, this once kind and generous stranger had finally shown his true face, and now he had complete control over not only his partner but her children. Noela couldn't move a muscle without his say-so, which is why when her normally rigid husband granted her permission to visit with family in East Africa, she was shook. She'd only just received the news that her stepmother, who practically raised her, was on her deathbed and only had a handful of days left to live. So, as instructed by her man, Noela travelled to Bujumbura to tell the only mother she'd ever known, "I love you," one last time. The family home in Burundi was said to have been very small. There wasn't enough room for all the siblings to stay, so because of this, she booked a nearby hotel. After her stepmother had passed away, Noela stayed behind to help arrange the funeral, etc. She'd spent countless hours organising and cooking meals for the wake, so when she arrived back at her hotel room just before 8 p.m. on the 17th of February 2015, it was safe to say she was exhausted. The weather at that time was absolutely stifling, and with no air conditioning in the room, she found herself dozing off, laying on top of the covers. A couple of minutes later, she was awoken by the sharp ringing of her mobile phone. It was her husband. He suggested that she pop on some shoes and go out for a walk in the night air to help her cool down. She was knackered, and at this point, she was willing to try anything. On Belenga's advice, Noela strolled out of the complex, closing the large iron gate behind her. But as she did this, she was confronted by a man with a gun. Just behind him, with the engine running and lights on, was a van. The gunman told her that if she tried to scream, she'd be shot. So, afraid for her life, Noela complied and got into the vehicle. Once the doors shut behind her, she noticed that there was 2 other men waiting in the back. They covered her eyes with a scarf, and for about 30 to 40 minutes, she sat there still and silent, trying her best to figure a way out of this. When they eventually arrived at their destination, they removed Noela's makeshift blindfold and forced her to sit on a chair, which she was then tied to. Looking around, she couldn't see much. All she could tell was that she had been transported to some sort of abandoned building or small warehouse. Another man had arrived at the front entrance to let them in, and now it was 4 against 1. Noela was not liking those odds. She begged the men to let her go, even telling them of her family back in Melbourne, but they just laughed at her and made cruel jibes. They would whisper about her in the corner of that dank little room, and at first she couldn't quite make out what they were saying, but then she kept hearing them referring to a 5th party, a man they called the boss. Noela racked her brain for anything, any reason why someone would want to do this to her. Her family were well respected within the community, and she hadn't been back home for years. Who could she have pissed off so badly? And whilst all the way back in Melbourne, it didn't make any sense. So was this a ransom job? Yes, she and Belenga were doing well in Oz, but they were hardly raking the money in. The 4 men holding her captive weren't giving much away either. They taunted her, calling her a fool, asking her what she did to make the boss want to kill her so badly. One of the men then pulled out his phone, and after a couple of rings, the person on the other end picked up. The kidnapper stated, "We've got her here, tied up. Now what do you want us to do with her?" He then clicked a button, putting the man they called the boss on loudspeaker. He coldly replied, "Kill her." Tears filled Noela's eyes. She was trembling in absolute terror. Nausea rose in her throat and refused to go away. In that brutal moment, her heart felt as though it had been shattered into a million tiny pieces. Because she knew she was going to die, yes. But mostly because Noela recognised the voice on the other end of that call. It was the man who she'd shared a bed with for the past 9 years. It was Belenga Kalala, and he'd just signed her death warrant. Numb and still in complete disbelief to what she'd just heard, Noela was barely listening as the 4 gunmen continued to tease and torment her. They told her that her husband had been planning the hit since November 2014. Literally, the moment he found out about her sick stepmother, he started arranging to have her killed. Over and over again, they asked her how she could have been so stupid and how she could have missed that giant shift in her marriage. Sadly, it was a question that Noela couldn't answer. Were things in her relationship perfect? Far from it, but she never truly thought that her husband could have been capable of murder. How could he do this, not only to her, but to their children? 5 of Noela's children had already lost their biological father, and he was willing to take their mother away from them too. It was becoming clear that she was sharing her home with a literal stranger. The Belenga that she thought she knew was a work of fiction. The men shuffled around her as if figuring out what they were going to do, until one of them broke the silence. He told Noela that luckily she'd fallen into the right hands because this group shared a sacred moral code. They do not kill women or children. They also admitted to being acquaintances with her brother, and out of respect for the family, no harm would come to her. They warned that Belenga had been shopping for an assassin for over 4 months, and that they only accepted the job to stop someone else from taking him up on his twisted offer. After approaching them in the November, Belenga had been secretly corresponding with the gang behind his wife's back. During that time, the 4 men recorded everything, every phone conversation, every payment, curating a pile of evidence for Noela to take back to Australian authorities. The young mother wasn't sure what to make of their claims. Could she really have been this lucky? Were they actually going to let her go free? Maybe, but they did want to shake down her husband for a little more cash first. The group once again called Belenga, this time to confirm that the job was complete, and with a bit of help from Noela, they were able to convince him that she was indeed dead. And guys, we know that murder is no laughing matter, but I just couldn't help but laugh, literally picturing her sitting there, laying on the ground, pretending to be dead. So they push him for more money, and at first he protests because he's already wired 7,000 Australian dollars as payment for the hit. But not wanting to cause any trouble with these hardened criminals, he relents, giving them a further 3,400. Whilst this soap opera unfolded, Noela's family grew concerned about her whereabouts, thinking she'd just vanished into thin air. Her brother had known girls who went missing in Africa, and they rarely made it back home alive. Completely unaware of his deceitful murder for hire plot, he reaches out to his brother-in-law Belenga, asking for the money to pay police so that they would open the investigation. And right now, I can hear your wheels turning. You're thinking, Megan, you have to pay money to file a police report? Well, you shouldn't have to, but yes, in certain parts of Africa, you must offer a donation bribe in order for law enforcement to take your child's sister's, daughter's, mother's case seriously. And that's why it's so difficult to find any accurate stats for missing and murdered women in Central and East Africa. It's not that it doesn't happen there, because, oh Jesus, it does. It's just that there's no record of it happening there. So unless you come from an extremely wealthy family with unlimited financial resources, the chance of actual justice being served are pretty minimal. Even Noela's brother is forced to gift $545 before authorities will even consider opening the investigation. After receiving their final piece of the pie via wire transfer, the 4 hitmen drop Noela off on the side of the road next to her hotel, armed with all the evidence they've gathered throughout the last 4 months. Her brother, who hasn't slept for the last 2 days, stumbles upon his sister during another random search of the area, and the two share a tearful reunion. Together, they approach law enforcement, but again, they're as useful as a chocolate teapot, and because Belenga is currently living in a different country, they say they are unable to assist. Noela knew it would only be a matter of time before her husband realised he'd been double-crossed, and so she hatched a very clever plan. She contacted the Belgian and Kenyan embassies to help her get out of Africa and back to Melbourne safely. She contacted her loyal pastor from Kings Park, explaining the entire situation to him and pleading for his help. Of course, initially he was in shock. Belenga Kalala had been playing the role of second-time widower perfectly. Those in the community had rallied around him and the kids since the news of his wife's disappearance had broke. But after looking at the bank statements and listening to the voice notes recorded by the would-be assassins, he had no choice but to believe her. Finally back on Australian soil, Noela yearned for her babies. She knew it was important for her safety to remain hidden, but that doesn't mean it didn't kill her to do so. Back home in Africa, her family set the scene, informing Belenga that she'd never returned and that local authorities believed she'd been abducted, presumably murdered. Unfortunately, as you can imagine, it's actually quite common for people, especially women and children, to be declared deceased without a body in Africa. Along with the help of Australian law enforcement and trusted friends, Noela was able to orchestrate the entire thing. From her glamorous yet tasteful funeral service to her dramatic entrance at the end of the night. As she got out of that car, she felt like a new woman. She no longer feared Belenga. As she watched him crumble in front of her eyes, she felt nothing but pity and disgust. She grinned as she sang, "Surprise!"
Surprise, motherfucker!
And surprised he was. Belenga looked like he'd seen a ghost. And I guess in some ways, he had. He even touched her shoulder to check that she was real and not some strange manifestation of his guilt. Noela just smirked as he dropped to the ground, crying out that he was sorry between sobs. But it was too late for sorries now, and just like that, the man she'd spent so many years being afraid of was taken away by police, babbling like a madman. Finally, she could be reunited with her children. She could hold them and explain why she did what she had to do. However, as sweet as this moment was, Noela Rukundo's journey was far from over. In order to make the charges against her husband stick, investigators needed more. They needed a recorded confession. As instructed to by police, Noela called her now ex, and he broke down, confessing to everything. When asked for his reasons, he admitted that somehow his obsessive need for control had taken over, and he'd convinced himself that she was having an affair, which, by the way, she was not. So, in the autumn of 2014, he decided to himself that if he couldn't have her, then no one could. It was pure dumb luck that he'd been put in touch with close acquaintances of her brother, as had he been connected with anyone else, Noela would probably be gone. When first interviewed at the police station, Belenga denied all of his estranged wife's accusations. But after being confronted with that damning recorded phone call and all of the evidence gathered by the 4 kidnappers, he was once again reduced to tears. This time, he said that it wasn't jealousy that drove him to kill. He said he was hearing the devil. So yeah, do what you will with that. As the case went to court in the December of 2015, Noela was still suffering from the aftershocks of her lover's betrayal. Many within the Congolese community have actually spoken out against the single mum. Due to fundamentalist beliefs, they feel as though she was wrong to hand him over to authorities, despite the fact that he most definitely would have tried to kill her again if given the opportunity. The Australian court system sided with Noela, and on the 11th of December that year, Balenga Kalala was sentenced to 9 years in prison for the incitement of murder. Noela's 8 children, including the 3 biological kids she shares with her ex, refused to have any communication with the man they once considered a loving father and stepfather. Balenga was eligible for parole in early 2021, and it's believed he was released from prison sometime in April 2022. According to his most recent Facebook updates, he's living in Rockbank, Victoria, Australia. Due to the circumstances in which he left his home country, he cannot be extradited back there despite his recent conviction. So single ladies out there, beware. As for Noela Rukundo, she has been keeping a pretty low profile since her story went viral back in 2016. She's focused on giving her children the best start in life, and as for romance, understandably, she's swearing off men for the foreseeable. But I'm hoping that one day she finds her own Prince Charming. Just think, it would make a hell of a first date story. There's not many women out there who can say that they crashed their own funeral. I hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up. For me, it really helps this wee channel o' mine. If you're watching for the first time, I promise the accent does get easier to understand. Please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. Also guys, if you're interested in this particular case, there is also a Lifetime movie which is based loosely, and I use the term loosely, on this crime, and it stars the gorgeous Megan Good. So if you want to, it's called Death Saved My Life. Check it out. You all know I love you so much. So remember to lock your doors, don't talk to strangers, and guys, if you're gonna throw your wife a funeral, maybe make sure she's really dead first. See ya!
How to tell if she's crazy.
Big kisses.